If you've looked around the streets of your own hometown and maybe you've seen stuff that looks like it came out of a war zone, well, get used to it. A new report by the ACLU finds that police forces throughout the U.S. are arming their law enforcement agents with weapons and tactics of war. This has not come without consequence, though. Last month, a 3-year-old baby boy was badly burned when a SWAT team accidentally dropped a flash grenade into his crib while searching for someone suspected of making a $50 drug sale. And back in 2012, a similar raid saw police throw a flash grenade into the bedroom of a sleeping 12-year-old girl. She was also badly burned. And in both incidents, SWAT deployments were not sent out to deal with some sort of emergency situation, but rather they were used to search homes for drugs. In fact, the ACLU found that 62% of SWAT deployments were hunting for drugs. And it's not only that innocent people are getting caught up in the raids. The ACLU also found that minorities were disproportionately targeted. 39% of people impacted by SWAT deployments were Black and 11% were Latino. And as for acquiring weapons of war, the ACLU estimates that 500 law enforcement agencies have received mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles, or also known as MRAPs, that were built to withstand roadside bombs. And to talk with us about this growing militarization of police departments, I was joined earlier by Elizabeth Beavers. She is the Legislative Associate for Militarism and Civil Liberties at the Friends Committee on National Legislation. I first asked her if the recent mistakes made by SWAT teams represent the larger issue at hand.
Sure. You know what, our good friends at the ACLU, they've done a fantastic job at submitting this report and just sort of confirming what I think many have suspected for a long time, which is that the police are looking more and more like military. You know, and we remember that military forces and police units are two separate institutions, and they have separate mandates and separate responsibilities. But instead, what we're seeing is that weapons and equipment that's specifically designed for the war zone is flooding into local police, and so when they have it, they're going to want to use it. And we've seen this rise of SWAT teams, a rise of all these aggressive tactics that you've done such a great job of highlighting here. And then also we're seeing that as they increase their usage of it, it's not because crime or the violence is escalating. It's because in the usual course of law enforcement, that's what they're using them for. And so it's low-level search warrants, executing search warrants, drug raids, that sort of thing that we're seeing, and we don't think that it increases security. We think
it's not necessarily necessary.
That's right, and it's actually sort of making things worse, because when police officers are looking like soldiers, acting like soldiers, they're going to start to see everyone around them as an enemy instead of people to protect and to serve. And so that sort of keeps the cycle going of violence.
Right, and as we mentioned, the communities of color seem to be the most affected by these types of SWAT deployments. Can you speak to that trend?
Sure. Well, I think that it reflects exactly what the war on drugs has showed us for the last few decades, which is that that's exactly who is affected by this war on drugs, and this is just another mechanism of enforcing that. And what we've seen is that specifically through this 1033 program, which that's the Department of Defense program that transfers weapons and vehicles and all this equipment to police departments for free, this is reaching every state. All 50 states, 4 U.S. territories, almost $5 billion worth of equipment has been handed out since this program was enacted. We see that no one is really safe from this.
Now, are these the equipment that the police departments are getting, are they, I'm hearing that they're hand-me-downs from our ending wars, and they're coming back and then just getting redistributed, is that right?
That's exactly right, and we do have to look at the root causes of this. Why is there so much excess equipment in the first place? Because that's exactly what this program does, is when there's something that's extra that the Department of Defense doesn't want or doesn't need, they hand it down. Although I will say that a certain percentage has been shown to actually be brand new equipment that's never been used. So that tells us something about the level of defense contracts that we're purchasing.
So it's not necessarily pre-owned, we'll call them pre-owned stuff that was used in, say, Afghanistan. This is extra stuff that was laying around that the DoD had.
Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. There's a percentage both ways for sure, but either way, it's the same equipment, though specifically designed to withstand bombs in a war zone, not necessarily, small town USA.
And now you're helping Congressman Hank Johnson develop legislation that'll help reform that existing 1033 program. Can you tell us a little bit about these reforms?
Sure. This is one of those issues that there's a fascinating sort of uniting of the left and the right on this issue. Congressman Johnson, as you mentioned, has been developing some great legislation. He's attempting to rein in the 1033 program and try to stop the transfer of these MRAPs, of the weapons that are specifically designed for the military, not for law enforcement, and also try to put some reins around the accountability, because one of the really troubling things we've seen, which the ACLU again did such a great job of highlighting, is that there's not a lot of oversight. These departments are receiving this equipment, these weapons, and they're losing them or they're selling them. They're going missing.
Them?
Yes.
Is there evidence of that?
Yes, there is. There are 11 jurisdictions just in Indiana that were suspended from the program because they couldn't account for their weapons. In my home state of North Carolina, a sheriff was found guilty of selling his on eBay. I mean, these are just some absolutely egregious examples.
Wow.
That's something that Congressman Johnson is trying to put some reins around.
That's excellent. Now, what kind of reception do you think this legislation will receive from Congress, and what kind of arguments are you expecting or anticipating from the other side?
Again, I think that there's real bipartisan hunger here to do something about this. Representative Chris Stewart as well from Utah has been introducing some legislation of his own to get around the very related problem of federal agencies having sort of paramilitary units at their disposal. So what we've seen is this really is sort of a growing trend. It's not something that's isolated to the Democratic Party, the Republican Party. And quite frankly, it's time for Congress to start putting some reins around this, because what we've seen in the last decade is not only unchecked weapons like this, but it's come from unchecked war authority and unchecked war funding. And that's starting to funnel back home. And so it is the responsibility of Congress to step in, restore that separation of powers, and start to restore the constitutional balance of powers there.
Now, another legislative effort is being made by Utah Republican Congressman Chris Stewart.
Yeah.
And he introduced legislation this week that would ban non-law enforcement agencies from buying these high-powered firearms. What does this entail?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was referencing earlier. It's a great piece of legislation. So good to see it on the Republican side as well as the Democratic side.
Kind of shocking.
Yeah, it's great. It's how often does this happen in Congress? So it's great to find something they can agree on.
It might teach them to work together.
That's exactly right. But some of these stories almost sound made up, and these are some of them that Congressman Stewart is looking to get some reins around, because there was a story that the Department of Education had this paramilitary unit that was executing warrants, the FDA, these regulatory agencies that don't have a law enforcement purpose, for some reason have law enforcement capabilities, and that's something that this bill would scale back.
Wow. We've got to have you back on the show to talk some more about that. All righty. That was Elizabeth Beavers, Legislative Associate for Militarism and Civil Liberties at the Friends Committee on National Legislation. Thank you for your insight.